Imagine you're a powerful king at a glittering banquet, wearing expensive clothes, pretending to care about important conversations, when destiny suddenly decides to pick you up, shake you like a broken vending machine, and dump you directly into the worst romantic decision of your life. Imagine the chandeliers judging you. Imagine the musicians playing dramatically for no reason. Imagine a decorative plant looking disappointed in your entire bloodline. Now imagine waking up tomorrow married. I'm confused and emotionally sponsored by Soup. Congratulations, you're in the right story. Welcome, dear viewers, to the channel, the only place where bad decisions get crowns, romance comes with side effects, and fate runs on pure audacity and zero planning. Before we continue, a tiny, friendly, completely reasonable announcement. Subscribe. Because if you don't, somewhere in this kingdom a perfectly innocent teacup will be poisoned by plot. A dramatic violin will start playing in the background for no reason, and a very powerful man will be forced to go on a midnight quest for pickled honey apples that do not exist. You don't want that on your conscience. Be a good person. Click subscribe. Save a king. Or at least save the teacup. The teacup has done nothing wrong. Good. Now let's ruin some lives. Lydia Moore had a plan. Not a small plan. Not a vague plan. A structured, ambitious, criminally confident plan. Or the kind of plan that looked brilliant in her head and illegal in real life. If she could have projected it onto a wall, it would have had bullet points and a very unnecessary title like My Inevitable Rise to Queenship. It went like this. Step 1. Steal a no-wolf drug. Step 2. Drug the Alpha King. Step 3. Sleep with him. Step 4. Get pregnant. Step 5. Become queen and tell everyone it was destiny. Simple, elegant, completely unhinged. She had even practiced her shocked but honored face in the mirror. Unfortunately, it looked less like destiny and more like she was about to sneeze while lying. Banquet night arrived wrapped in silk, gold, music, and far too many people who thought gossip was a competitive sport. The hall glittered. The nobles preened. The servants moved like ghosts with trays. Somewhere someone was already drunk and pretending they weren't. Lydia was radiant. Lydia was confident. But Lydia was too confident. The kind of confident that usually gets personally targeted by fate. She slipped the no-wolf drug into a cup with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her head at least 47 times. All she had to do now was wait. Across the hall, Evan Hale, Alpha King, ruler of wolves, men, and several territories that insisted on being difficult, accepted a drink from a servant and took a polite sip. It was the wrong cup. The drug didn't creep in. It didn't whisper. It didn't politely announce itself. It arrived like a cursed truck with no brakes and no respect for royal bloodlines. Heat. Dizziness. A sudden and very personal argument with gravity. Evan blinked. The chandeliers blinked back. The floor shifted like it was considering betrayal. A decorative plant near the wall started looking extremely judgmental. Lydia saw her moment. She straightened, to fix her expression into what she believed was concerned but approachable, and moved in, already rehearsing the story she would tell in a few months about how fate had simply chosen her. And then she watched, in slow-motion horror, as Evan Hale staggered past her, straight past her, like she was a poorly placed piece of furniture. "Wait, Your Majesty," she started, reaching out. Too late. Because Evan Hale, I'm king of wolves and men, and currently in a committed relationship with terrible decisions, turned a corner at the exact wrong time, and collided with a lady-in-waiting carrying documents, opinions, and absolutely no intention of becoming part of history. Her name was Clara Reed. Papers flew. Dignity died. Evan grabbed her arm to keep from falling, stared at her like she was either a miracle or a door, and said very helpfully, "You, come with me." And Lydia Moore stood there, still watching her entire evil plan sprint away with the wrong woman. Clara Reed was having a perfectly ordinary night. Which is to say, her feet hurt, her arms were full of documents, 3 nobles had already asked her questions they could have asked literally anyone else, and she was counting the steps to her bed like a prisoner counting days to parole. 5 more corridors, 2 more staircases, 1 last stop to drop these papers. Freedom was close. Then the Alpha King grabbed her. Not aggressively, not politely, not even accurately. Just grabbed. "Your Majesty," Clara started, because when a king suddenly appears in your personal space, looking like he's fighting a private war with gravity, that feels like the correct opening line. Evan Hale was overheating, confused, and running on approximately 3% dignity. His vision was doing that helpful thing where everything doubled and then argued about which version was real. But his head felt like it had been stuffed with very loud bees. He squinted at her. She squinted back. Somewhere in his brain, a very small, very tired thought said, "Door. Bed. Now." He said the first part out loud. "You, come with me." "That's not how—" Clara began. He took her arm, not roughly, not gently, just urgently, and steered her down the corridor like a man whose body had filed a formal complaint against him. Clara tried to keep up, papers flapping, brain lagging. "Your Majesty, I think you might be unwell. We can call a healer, or several, or a parade of them. You look like you're about to argue with a wall." He did, in fact, pause to glare at a wall. The wall did not apologize. They passed 2 servants. The servants passed a look. That look said, "Is that the king?" And also, "Is he dragging a lady-in-waiting?" And finally, "Should we pretend we didn't see this?" They chose the traditional royal response, immediate gossip. "Sir, really, I don't think—" Clara tried again, or because she was a professional, and also because this felt like the start of a story that ended with paperwork. Evan reached a door. The wrong door. He pushed it open, pulled her inside. The door closed behind them with the kind of finality usually reserved for bad decisions and contracts you didn't read. Clara looked around. Large room, expensive furniture, dramatic curtains. Definitely not a storage room. Definitely not an office. Definitely— "Oh. Oh," she said. Evan blinked at the room like it had personally betrayed him, then at her, then back at the room. He took a step forward. The floor wobbled. He frowned at it like it was being unreasonable. "Your Majesty," Clara said carefully, "I think you're very sick." "Yes," he agreed, with immense seriousness. "But later." That was not reassuring. Somewhere in the palace, a servant dropped a tray. Somewhere else, someone started a betting pool. Somewhere very far away, when Lydia Moore probably felt destiny laugh in her face. And history, with absolutely no sense of self-preservation, was ruined. Clara Reed woke up like a person who had fallen asleep in her own life and woken up in someone else's. The ceiling was wrong. Not new apartment wrong. Not guest room wrong. This was expensive wrong. There were drapes, real drapes, the kind that looked like they had opinions about taxes. The bed was too big. The pillows were arranged like they had a union, and the air smelled like candles and bad decisions. Clara lay very still and did what any reasonable person would do in a crisis. She panicked silently. Then she panicked loudly. Then she sat up too fast, got dizzy, and had to sit there holding her own head like it was a fragile object she'd dropped. Memory arrived in pieces. Hallway. King. Door. Oh no. She looked to her left. There was a man in the bed. A very large man. A very royal man. A very unconscious man. The Alpha King. Clara stared at him. The Alpha King continued sleeping like a man who had personally offended exhaustion, and lost. Her brain did a quick, violent inventory. Not her bed, not her room. Definitely the king. And she was wearing the wrong shirt. "Oh," she whispered. Then, after a beat, "Oh no." Then, because the universe hates mercy, it all clicked. She pressed a hand to her face. "I am going to pass away," she told the room. "Not metaphorically. I mean spiritually and socially." The realization landed fully formed and extremely rude. She had lost her virginity. To the Alpha King. On a work night. Without scheduling it. She stared at him again, just to make sure this was really happening. He snored. Softly. Like a man who had no idea his life was about to become paperwork. Clara slid out of bed with the careful, guilty precision of someone trying not to wake a dragon, or worse, a king with questions. Her feet touched the floor. Cold, judgmental, unforgiving. She scanned the room like a burglar who did not want to be here. "I need to leave," she whispered to herself. "I need to leave right now. I need to leave before I become a historical event." She took one step, then stopped. Because her brain, in all its panic-driven brilliance, said, "You can't just leave. What if he says you made this up? What if nobody believes you? What if someone asks for proof?" Clara looked around again. Her gaze landed on a small table near the bed. On it sat a token. Heavy, decorative, very royal, very stealable. She stared at it. The token stared back, radiating the energy of an object that was absolutely not meant to be stolen by a stressed lady-in-waiting at dawn. "I'm borrowing you," she whispered, "for legal reasons." She tiptoed over like a raccoon in a silk palace, picked it up, and immediately almost dropped it because it was heavier than it looked. "Of course you are," she hissed at the token. "Of course you're dramatic." She tucked it into her clothes, glanced at the bed, and froze. Evan shifted. Clara stopped breathing. He turned his head, mumbled something that might have been a word, or might have been a complaint about furniture. She stood there, holding a stolen royal object, absolutely convinced this was how she would die. Then he went still again. Clara exhaled so hard she nearly passed out. "That was rude," she whispered at him. And then, or because she was not brave but she was fast, she fled. She slipped out the door, down the corridor, past one servant who blinked at her and decided wisely not to ask questions, around a corner, then another, then one more, just in case fate was following. By the time she reached her room, her heart was trying to escape her body and start a new life somewhere quieter. She shut the door, leaned against it, stared at the wall. "I am never making eye contact with anyone ever again," she announced. Evan Hale woke up later with a headache, a dry mouth, and the vague sense that the universe had hit him with something and run. He blinked. Ceiling. Bed. Silence. He turned his head. The other side of the bed was empty. He sat up slowly, because his skull filed a formal complaint. He looked around. Someone had been here. The room felt used. Also, something was missing. He stared at the small table. The token was gone. Evan frowned. He did a slow, a careful mental replay of the previous night and found static, just static and regret. "What?" he said to the empty room, very clearly. A few weeks later, Clara Reed threw up into a bucket and stared at it like it had personally declared war. The first sign that Clara Reed's life was about to get worse was the bucket. Not the existence of the bucket. Buckets were normal. Buckets were useful. Buckets were innocent. It was the urgent, His emotional need for the bucket at 6 in the morning that felt like a personal attack. Clara made it exactly 3 steps out of bed before her stomach staged a violent rebellion, and she had to sprint like a woman being chased by her own organs. 5 minutes later, she was on the floor, hugging the bucket like it was a misunderstood friend. "This," she told it weakly, "is not professional behavior." Her stomach disagreed and proved it. When she finally staggered back to the bed, pale and offended by existence, she tried to convince herself this was just something she ate. Unfortunately, her body had apparently signed up for a daily performance. Day 1. Bucket. Day 2. Bucket. Day 3. Bucket and a very dramatic dry heave that echoed down the hallway like a warning siren. By day 4, her mother noticed. Helen Reed noticed things the way storms notice boats. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, eyes sharp, and the expression of a woman who had raised a child and was not new to nonsense. "You're either dying," Helen said calmly, "or you're hiding something." "I am not dying," Clara said, lying in bed like a haunted Victorian child. "I just feel a little unwell." Helen looked at the bucket. The bucket looked guilty. Helen looked back at Clara. "A little," she repeated. The interrogation began that evening. It was not dramatic. It did not involve shouting. It was worse. It involved chairs. Clara sat in one. Her parents sat in 2 others. The air itself felt judgmental. "You've been sick for days," Helen said. "You're pale, you're tired, and you flinched when your father mentioned soup." "I flinch at soup now," Clara said. "It's a lifestyle." Her father, Peter, cleared his throat. "Is there something you want to tell us?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Decided to start with honesty and see how badly that went. "I might," she said carefully, "but be experiencing a situation." "A situation," Helen repeated. "Yes, a medical situation." Helen leaned forward. "Clara." Clara folded her hands, unfolded them, refolded them. "Okay, so, hypothetically, if someone were with child..." The room went very quiet. Her father blinked once. "With child?" "Yes, hypothetically." Helen did not blink. "Are you with child?" Clara considered lying. Her stomach chose that exact moment to revolt again. She leaned over, grabbed the bucket, and answered between waves of misery. "Yes." Silence. Then Helen said, very softly, "Who?" This was the moment Clara had been dreading. Her father looked confused. Her mother looked like she was about to become extremely calm in a very dangerous way. Someone, her cousin, who had been pretending not to listen from the corner, had the brilliant idea to say, "Who would be foolish enough to sleep with you?" Clara looked up, wiped her mouth, and said very evenly, "The Alpha King." The room exploded. Not literally, but emotionally it was close. Someone laughed. Then someone else laughed. Then her cousin laughed harder, like this was the best joke she'd heard all year. Her father stared at her. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." More laughter. "Clara," Helen said, in the voice she used when people were about to regret their life choices, "this is not the time for stories." Clara sighed. "Okay," she said, reaching into her things. "Well, then this is the time for evidence." She pulled out the token. Heavy, decorative, very royal, very real. The laughter died. The room leaned in. Her father stood up slowly. Helen took the token, turned it over in her hands, and went very, very still. "This," Helen said, "is palace-issued." Clara nodded. "I know. You can't just have this." "I also know that." Her cousin sat down, very carefully. The room was silent in a way that meant everything had changed. Helen looked at her daughter. "But when?" Clara stared at the floor. After the banquet, a few weeks ago, it was an accident. Her father rubbed his face with both hands. Of course it was. No one laughed this time. By nightfall, a message had been sent. Not loud, not public, not dramatic. Just a very quiet request for a meeting with the palace. And somewhere, very far away, fate probably started stretching, because things were about to get much worse. Or the palace meeting room had the kind of silence that came with expensive walls and bad news. Clara sat between her parents like she was about to be politely executed. Her mother, Helen, had the token in her bag like a legal weapon. Her father, Peter, looked calm in the way men do when they are deciding whether to throw furniture later. Across the table sat Evan Hale, Alpha King, ruler of many things, and currently looking like a man who had woken up inside someone else's consequences. And next to him sat Margaret Hale, Queen Mother, professional problem solver, smiler of smiles that ended careers. Standing near the wall, trying to look decorative and failing, was Lydia Moore. She looked confident. This was a mistake. Evan cleared his throat. "So," he said carefully, "I'm told there is a situation." Helen Reed placed the token on the table. It made a very small, very loud sound. Evan's eyes dropped to it, then narrowed, then widened. Then did something between a blink and a wince. "Ah, that was in my room," he said slowly. "Yes," Clara said. "I took it." "You—" He stopped, restarted. "You took it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I panicked." "That is not a reason." It felt like one at the time. Margaret, who had been watching Clara like a woman inspecting a very interesting purchase, leaned forward. "Dear, are you the girl who ran away before my son woke up?" Clara blinked. "Yes, Your Majesty." Margaret smiled. It was not a gentle smile. "Oh, I like you already." Evan looked betrayed by his own bloodline. Helen folded her hands. "My daughter is with child." The room paused. Evan's brain tried to reboot. "With child," he repeated. "Yes." He looked at Clara. She nodded. He looked at the token, then at the ceiling. Then, very quietly, "I was drugged." Lydia flinched. It was small. It was subtle. It was also the loudest movement in the room. Evan's head turned. Slowly. Margaret's head turned faster. Helen's eyes sharpened like knives that had gone to finishing school. "Oh?" Margaret said pleasantly, looking directly at Lydia. "You seem startled." I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty," Lydia said, immediately sweating in a very decorative way. Evan frowned. Pieces clicked together with the enthusiasm of a trap. "The drink," he said slowly. "The heat, the dizziness, the hallway plant that looked like it was judging me." Clara blinked. "It was." "I knew it," he muttered. And Margaret looked at Lydia like she was a very disappointing painting. "Did you do something foolish?" "No," Lydia said too fast. Helen leaned back. "Interesting." Margaret smiled wider. "Fascinating." Lydia realized, too late, that this room was not on her side. Evan exhaled, rubbing his face. "So, I was drugged. I slept with a woman I did not intend to sleep with. That woman is now with child." Clara raised a hand. "To be fair, I didn't intend it either." "Thank you," he said weakly, while Margaret tapped the table. "And now we arrive at the boring part." Everyone looked at her. She said the word like it offended her. "Tradition." The air got heavier. Helen's mouth tightened. Peter crossed his arms. Evan already knew where this was going and hated every step of the journey. Margaret continued, cheerfully ruthless. "If a royal child is conceived, the parents marry. No council, no debate, no drama. We are not turning this into a theater production." Evan opened his mouth. closed it, tried again. "Mother, do not," she said sweetly. "Start a sentence you will lose." Clara stared at Margaret. "I'm sorry?" Margaret waved a hand. "Don't apologize, you're family now." Clara froze. "I am what?" "Oh, yes," Margaret said brightly. "You're perfect. You don't look impressed by him at all." Evan looked personally wounded. Helen tilted her head. "So, this is decided?" Margaret nodded. "Entirely." Evan stared at the table. "I'm getting married." "Yes," Margaret said. Congratulations. Try to look alive in the portraits." Clara stared at him. He stared back. They shared a long, silent moment of mutual, "What have we done?" In the corner, Lydia realized something terrible. She had not won. She had not even placed. She had been cut from the race. The announcement went out that evening. Brief, polite, unavoidable. The Alpha King is to be married. Lydia read it. Read it again. Then stared at it like it had personally insulted her ancestors, her ambitions, and her entire imaginary future. And somewhere in the palace, fate probably laughed and ordered snacks. The wedding happened the way natural disasters happen. Fast, loud, with very little warning. By morning, the palace was in motion. By afternoon, people were tripping over ribbons. By evening, someone was crying into a basket of flowers because they had been told the color scheme was royal, and nobody had explained what that meant. Clara Reed woke up, blinked, and was informed she was getting married today. She stared at the messenger. "I'm sorry. I think you said a word too quickly. Can you repeat the part where my life ends?" "You're to be married this evening, my lady." Clara looked at the ceiling, looked back at the messenger. "To him?" "Yes, my lady." She lay back down. "I need a moment to pass away." Across the palace, Evan Hale was having a similar conversation with his reflection. "No," he told it firmly. The reflection, annoyingly, or did not care. By midday, the palace looked like it had been attacked by lace. Servants ran. Courtiers whispered. Someone lost a shoe and blamed politics. Margaret Hale walked through it all like a general inspecting troops, smiling like this was the best entertainment she'd had in years. "Isn't this lovely?" she said to absolutely no one in particular. Clara was dressed, undressed, and dressed again by people who kept calling her "Your Grace," like that was a normal sentence. "Look, I was filing papers 2 days ago," Clara said faintly, as someone adjusted something sparkly. "I don't think this is a reasonable career progression." "You'll get used to it," a maid said kindly. Clara did not believe her. Evan, meanwhile, stood in ceremonial clothes that felt like they weighed more than guilt. He looked like a king. He felt like a man being marched toward consequences. When he saw Clara at the altar, his brain did a very strange thing. It stopped screaming for half a second. But she looked overwhelmed, confused, like someone who had taken a wrong turn and ended up in history. Margaret beamed. "This is wonderful," she whispered to Evan. "You look like you're attending your own execution." "Mother," he said through his teeth, "please." The ceremony was short. Not romantic short. More like legally efficient short. Vows were said. Papers were signed. A crown did not fall off anyone's head, which everyone agreed was a success. The staff, however, were already busy. But in a quiet corner near the kitchen, a betting pool was born. "How long before he cracks?" 2 weeks. 3 days. I give him until she rejects soup twice. Coins exchanged hands. Dignity did not. Lydia Moore appeared halfway through the reception with the smile of a woman who had absolutely not accepted reality. "Your Grace," she said sweetly to Clara, "if you need help adjusting, I'd be happy to—" Margaret appeared at Clara's side, like she had been summoned by audacity. "Oh, but Lydia," she said warmly. "That's very kind. Why don't you help by standing over there and not speaking?" Lydia opened her mouth. Margaret smiled wider. Lydia went to stand over there. The evening passed in a blur of polite applause, careful conversations, and Clara trying very hard not to make eye contact with anyone who might call her Your Majesty by accident. That night was quiet. Too quiet. Two people in a very large room, sitting very far apart, but both pretending they were extremely interested in different pieces of furniture. "This is awkward," Clara said finally. "Yes," Evan agreed. "Extremely." They sat in silence again. It was the loudest silence either of them had ever heard. Somewhere around midnight, Clara's stomach made a decision. She barely made it to the basin before reality reminded her that it was still in charge. Evan was on his feet instantly, holding her hair back without thinking. He froze. She froze, but they both realized what had just happened. "This," Evan said stiffly, staring at the wall, "is practical." Clara, miserable, nodded. "Unfortunately." When it was over, they just stood there for a second. Evan hated the part of himself that thought, "This feels normal." He hated it even more when he realized it was true. The healers arrived like prophets of doom and smelled faintly of boiled leaves. They examined Clara. They hummed thoughtfully, or they wrote things down like her stomach was a complicated essay question. Then they delivered their verdict with the confidence of people who would not be eating the food they were about to recommend. "She needs simple, nourishing meals," the oldest healer said. "Light foods, gentle foods, things that won't offend the stomach." Evan nodded like a man who could absolutely handle this. "What sort of things?" he asked. The healer smiled. "Soup." Clara, who had been sipping water and trying not to think about the bucket, went very still. "Soup," she repeated. "Yes, broths, clear stews, mild flavors." Clara blinked. "Mild like peaceful mild? Or mild like emotionally absent mild?" The healer beamed. "Exactly." Evan clapped his hands once, relieved. "Good. We'll start immediately." This was his first mistake. 20 minutes later, a tray arrived carrying a bowl of soup that looked like it had given up on life halfway through. It was pale, but it was steaming. It smelled like someone had whispered the word vegetable into hot water, and then apologized. Evan set it down carefully in front of Clara, like he was presenting an offering to a very dangerous god. "There," he said. "Simple. Nourishing." Clara stared at it. The soup stared back, unseasoned and confident. She picked up the spoon, scooped a careful sip, put it in her mouth, paused, swallowed. Then she looked at Evan with genuine concern. "Did you season this?" she asked, very gently. "With sadness?" Evan frowned. "It's soup." "Yes," she said, "but it tastes like it was made by someone who doesn't believe in joy." He looked at the bowl. "It's what the healer said." She took another tiny sip, just to be fair. Her face fell like a curtain. "No," she decided. "I reject it." "You reject soup?" "Yes." "It's soup." "And yet," she said, pushing it away with the solemnity of a queen passing judgment, "here we are." Evan tried again at lunch. Different bowl. Or different cook. Same emotional damage. Clara took one sip and said, "This one tastes like a memory of salt." He tried again at dinner. She squinted into the bowl. "Why does this smell like regret?" By the fourth attempt, the kitchen staff was starting to recognize him by the sound of his footsteps and the way he looked slightly haunted. "Perhaps," Evan suggested carefully, "you could just try to eat a little more of it?" Clara looked at him like he had suggested betrayal. "But I would rather fight the soup." The soup, to its credit, did not fight back. Word spread. By the next morning, the palace kitchens had developed a warning system. Someone would whisper, "The king is coming," and suddenly, one cook would disappear behind a curtain. Another would pretend to be extremely busy with bread. A third would claim to be on break forever. Evan would enter, look around, and feel the air get evasive. "I just need soup," he said one morning. Where the head cook smiled the tight smile of a man who had seen too much. "Of course, Your Majesty." He produced a bowl with the enthusiasm of someone handing over a cursed object. Evan carried it back like a peace offering. Clara took one look at it and said, "Why is it looking at me like that?" "It's not looking at you." "It is." She tried it anyway. She always did. She was fair. Then she sighed. "This one tastes like a lecture." Evan stared at the ceiling for strength. By day 3, the staff betting pool had been updated. "Number of soups rejected today?" 5. "I heard 6. I heard she just glared at one and sent it away untouched." 2 Silver says he gives up and orders something illegal. Evan did not know about the betting pool. He did, however, know despair. At breakfast, he said, "The healers insist." Clara said, "The healers are not pregnant." This ended the discussion. By evening, the kitchen was actively hiding ladles. One young cook saw Evan coming and whispered, "No," like a prayer. Another crossed himself. Evan brought the bowl anyway. Clara leaned over it, sniffed, and said, "Why does this smell like wet optimism?" "It's chicken broth." "I do not trust that chicken." He sat down across from her, tired. "What do you want to eat?" She thought about it. Seriously. Like this was a matter of state. Then she said, "Something cold and sweet and salty and crunchy." Evan waited. She did not continue. At the same time?" he asked. "Yes. That's not a thing. It is now." He stared at her. She stared back. They were at war. "And," she added, as if remembering an afterthought, "I want it at midnight." The palace clock chose that moment to chime. Evan closed his eyes. Somewhere in the kitchen, a cook felt a great disturbance in the air. At midnight, the palace was quiet in the way only very expensive places could afford to be. Evan Hale, Alpha King, ruler of wolves, men, and several territories that had very strong opinions, stood in his room putting on boots like a man preparing for either a war or a very stupid errand. He looked at Clara. She was sitting in bed, wrapped in blankets, completely serious. "Something cold," she repeated, "and sweet, and salty, and crunchy." "All at once," he said. "Yes. That is not a food. That is a challenge." She nodded. "Exactly." He sighed, long-suffering and noble. "I will return." Clara watched him go, with the calm confidence of someone who had no idea how many lives were about to be inconvenienced. Outside, the night guard stared as the Alpha King marched past them with the expression of a man who had been defeated by domestic politics. "Your Majesty," one of them ventured. "I am on a quest," Evan said. "For?" the guard asked. Evan paused. "Snacks." The guard nodded slowly, the way people do when they decide not to ask further questions. Where the kitchens were asleep, the market was closed. The city, however, was not prepared for a king knocking on doors like a man possessed. He woke a baker. He frightened a fisherman. He argued with a very stubborn ice merchant who did not believe in destiny, royalty, or opening his shop after midnight. "I will pay," Evan said. "I will not," the merchant said. "I will make it a law," Evan said. The merchant blinked. "You will what?" Evan took a breath. "Please." The merchant stared, then sighed. "Fine. But if this is about soup, I'm closing again forever." It was not about soup. It was about assembling something that should not exist. Evan ended up with sweetbread that had been frozen in a panic, salted nuts that were definitely not meant to be paired with it, and something crunchy that might have been a pastry, but could also have been a mistake. By the time he made it back to the palace, he was muddy, tired, and had been chased by one extremely judgmental dog. But he burst into the room like a victorious hero. "I have returned," he announced, placing the plate down like it was a sacred artifact. Clara sat up, eyes bright. "You found it?" "I created it," he said grimly, "against nature." She picked up a piece, looked at it, sniffed it. Evan held his breath like a man waiting for a verdict. She took a bite, chewed, paused, swallowed. Then she frowned. "I don't want this anymore." The silence that followed was profound. Evan stared at her, and then he stared at the plate. Then he stared into the middle distance like a general remembering a very stupid war. "You don't want it," he repeated. "No," she said gently. "But thank you. That was very heroic." He nodded slowly. "I see." He did not, in fact, see. He sat down very carefully. His soul left his body, came back, and left again. Somewhere, a guard would later swear he saw the Alpha King whisper, "Never again," to a plate of snacks. Clara reached out and squeezed his hand. "What, I might want it later." This did not help. The next morning, the palace woke up to whispers. Not about soup, not about cravings, about rumors. And in one very particular corner of the court, Lydia Moore smiled like a woman who had decided to set something on fire and call it concern. By mid-morning, the palace had developed a hobby. That hobby was whispering. Whispers moved faster than servants, tripped over carpets, and somehow reached rooms before people did. They curled around pillars, or they hid behind curtains. They absolutely refused to mind their business. By the time Clara walked into the smaller reception hall with Evan, the air already felt crunchy. Not the good kind of crunchy, the gossip kind. Clara noticed first because she noticed everything lately, mostly because everything lately made her tired. "Why is everyone looking at me like I'm a very polite disaster?" she asked quietly. Evan followed her gaze. Courtiers were smiling too much, too carefully, like people who had recently learned something they were not brave enough to say out loud. He felt something cold and unpleasant settle in his stomach. Margaret Hale, however, looked delighted. She entered the hall like a woman arriving at a show she had paid good money to watch. Lydia Moore was already there, and Lydia was glowing. This was not a good sign. She drifted closer with the soft, concerned expression of someone who had absolutely planned this moment in advance. "Your Majesties," Lydia said sweetly, "I hope you're both well. I was just speaking with Lady Varen about the news." Clara smiled politely. "Oh, which news?" Lydia tilted her head. "Well, you know how people talk." "They do," Clara agreed. "Constantly, loudly, about things that are not their business." "Yes," Lydia said, still smiling. "It's just that some people were wondering, with everything happening so quickly." Evan's eyes narrowed. Margaret's smile sharpened. "And?" Margaret prompted. My Lydia clasped her hands. "Oh, nothing improper. Just questions. Natural questions." "Such as?" Evan asked. Lydia hesitated, like a woman pretending she didn't absolutely want to say this. "Well," she said gently, "about the timing, and whether the child is certainly—" She let the sentence trail off like a dropped handkerchief. The room went quiet. Very quiet. The kind of quiet that suggested someone had just thrown a lit match into a room full of curtains. Clara blinked. "Certainly. What?" Lydia gave a soft, apologetic laugh. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. It's just that sometimes people make assumptions, and assumptions can be dangerous." Margaret turned to Lydia with a smile so pleasant it could have been carved into marble. "My dear," she said, "are you suggesting my grandchild might not be my grandchild?" Lydia flushed. "I would never suggest—" "You just did," Margaret said cheerfully. "With flair." Evan felt heat rise up his spine. Not the drug this time. Something cleaner, sharper, angrier. Clara, however, looked thoughtful. "Oh," she said slowly. "You mean because I worked in the palace?" Lydia's smile twitched. "Well, you were around many people." "Oh," Clara continued, nodding. "You think I just wandered into someone else's bed by mistake?" The room collectively stopped breathing. "I didn't mean—" Lydia began. Clara brightened. "That would be impressive, actually. I barely wander into rooms correctly. I once got lost in the linen closet." A few courtiers coughed. Someone hid a laugh. Lydia tried again. "I'm only saying that certainty is important, for the kingdom." Margaret turned slightly, like a cat adjusting before pouncing. "Lydia," she said warmly, "do you remember what happened the night of the banquet?" Lydia stiffened. "Of course." "Do you remember," Margaret continued, "how my son was unwell?" "Yes." "And do you remember," Margaret said, still smiling, "that you were the one hovering near his drink?" The room leaned in. Lydia's face did something between a smile and a collapse. "I was only concerned for His Majesty," she said quickly. "Of course you were," Margaret agreed. "So concerned that you accidentally inspired a scandal, a wedding, and my personal joy. Thank you for your service." A few people gasped. Clara, trying to be helpful, added, "Also, I took a token from his room, if that helps with certainty." Evan turned to her. "Would you keep saying that like it's normal?" "It was a very stressful morning," she said. Someone laughed, out loud, then tried to pretend it was a cough. Lydia's smile finally cracked. "I only wanted what was best for the kingdom," she said tightly. Margaret nodded. "And now you have it. Isn't that wonderful?" Evan took a step forward. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Do not," he said, "ever suggest that my wife is a liar, or that my child is not mine." The room went silent again. Clara looked at him, surprised. He did not look away. "And do not," he continued, "pretend this is concern. It is not." Lydia opened her mouth. Margaret beat her to it. "I think," Margaret said pleasantly, "that Lydia should take some time away from conversation." The court understood what that meant. Lydia understood it too. She bowed stiffly and left with what dignity she had left in a very small box. The whispers died. Clara exhaled. "That was uncomfortable." Evan looked at her. "Or are you all right?" She nodded. "Just tired." That word did it. Evan turned to the nearest attendant. "Cancel the council meeting." The attendant blinked. "Your Majesty, the council." "My wife is tired," Evan said. "They will survive." Clara stared at him. The court stared at him. And somewhere, the betting pool updated its numbers. By the end of the week, the palace had learned a new, important truth. Evan Hale could win wars. Evan Hale could not win arguments in his own house. Or this was not a rumor. This was a pattern. It started small. A council meeting was moved because Clara was tired. Then another. Then a third. By the fourth reschedule, the council began to suspect the real ruler of the kingdom was a woman who owned exactly 3 nightgowns and 1 very judgmental bucket. "Your Majesty," one advisor ventured carefully, "we cannot keep moving meetings." Evan, who was quietly adjusting the curtains because Clara said the light was too aggressive, replied, "We can. And we will. But she needs a nap." The advisor paused. "A strategic nap." "Yes," Evan said, completely serious. A vital one. Somewhere in the palace, the betting pool added a new category. How many times will the king say nap in a single day? At home, the situation was not improving. Clara had developed a schedule that was less a schedule and more a series of sudden emergencies. "I'm tired," she would announce. Evan would nod. "Or we will cancel things." "I feel sick." Evan would already be standing. "Where is the basin?" "I think I want something salty." Evan would already be halfway to the door. "I'll get it." One afternoon, she barely had time to lean over the basin before he was there, holding her hair back like this was now a deeply personal career choice. They froze again, like they always did. "This is happening a lot," Clara said weakly. "Yes," Evan agreed. "I am alarmingly efficient. I don't remember asking you to be." "You didn't," he said. "It appears to have happened anyway." He fetched food. A lot of food. He fetched food that made sense. He fetched food that made no sense. He fetched food that had to be explained by 3 different cooks and a very tired guard. At one point, he returned with something wrapped in paper and hope. Clara looked at it. "What is that?" "I don't know," Evan admitted. "But someone swore it was both crunchy and comforting." She took a bite. Considered it. Then said, "I don't want this anymore." Evan stared at the wall like it had personally betrayed him. Later that evening, his friend Noah Brooks found him in the corridor, holding a tray and looking like a man who had recently lost a philosophical argument with cheese. Noah raised an eyebrow. "You realize you're walking toward the kitchens again, right?" "Yes," Evan said. "And you were just there?" "Yes." "And before that?" "Yes." Noah watched him for a moment, then smiled slowly. "You're gone." "I am not." "You are," Noah said pleasantly. "Completely. You used to command armies. Now you're on a snack rotation." Evan frowned. "This is temporary." Noah glanced at the tray. "That's what you said yesterday, and the day before, and right before you canceled a council meeting because the curtains were too bright for her mood." "They were," Evan said defensively. "Or they were attacking her eyes." Noah laughed. "You're rearranging the kingdom around her naps." "That is not true." At that exact moment, an attendant hurried up. "Your Majesty, Lady Clara says she's tired again." Evan turned on his heel instantly. "Cancel everything." Noah just looked at him. Evan paused. "It's a coincidence," he said, and walked away. That night, Clara was sitting in bed, flipping through a book she was not actually reading. Evan was nearby, pretending not to hover. She looked up suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," he said immediately. She blinked. "That was fast." "I'm efficient," he said. "Apparently." She studied him for a second, then smiled in a small, tired way. "If it's a girl," she said casually, "I'm naming her Chaos." The room went very, very quiet. Evan stared at her. At the wall, at the ceiling, at his entire life, flashing politely before his eyes. "You're naming our child," he said slowly. "Chaos." "Yes." "That is not a name." "It is," she said. "It's a perfect name." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We can discuss alternatives." She shook her head. "No." "Clara, no." He sat down very carefully, like a man whose legs had decided to resign. Somewhere in the palace, the betting pool would later explode with excitement. And somewhere in Evan Hale's soul, a tiny voice whispered, "You are losing this war too." Or the problem with announcing a name like Chaos is that it does not sit quietly in a room. It arrives. It kicks over furniture. It makes people question their life choices. By breakfast, the court knew. Not because Evan told anyone. He did not. He had hoped, briefly, foolishly, that if he refused to speak the word out loud, it might go back where it came from. Unfortunately, the palace had servants, and servants had ears, and ears had hobbies. So when Clara walked into the small morning gathering with Evan at her side, the room already felt tense, like a church right before someone swore. "Good morning," Clara said cheerfully. Several courtiers flinched. Someone dropped a spoon. Evan cleared his throat. "We're just here for breakfast." "Of course, Your Majesty," said Lord Ferris, who was staring at Clara like she might start reciting prophecies. "We were just discussing names." Clara smiled. "Oh, I picked one." A woman near the window made a sound like she'd been lightly stabbed. Evan tried to intercept. "We are still discussing chaos," Clara said brightly. The silence was immediate and violent. If silence could scream, this one would have been escorted out by guards. Lady Varen crossed herself. "You can't say that in here." "Say what?" Clara asked. "Chaos," two people hissed. A third looked toward the ceiling like they were checking if lightning had a schedule. Evan closed his eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough to mourn the man he used to be. "It's bold," said Lord Ferris carefully. "Very expressive." "It's a warning," muttered someone near the back. Clara beamed. "Exactly." Evan leaned toward her. "We talked about this." "We did," she said. "You suggested alternatives. I said no." "Yes, but that was in private. This is public." "So is the baby," she pointed out. Eventually. Margaret Hale chose that moment to enter, and perfectly timed like a woman who enjoyed entrances and emotional damage. "What are we talking about?" she asked pleasantly. Several courtiers spoke at once. None of them said the word. Clara turned. "I'm naming the baby Chaos." Margaret's face lit up. Not politely, not cautiously, delightedly. "Oh, I love it," she said. Evan stared at his mother like she had just confessed to arson. "You love it?" "Yes," Margaret said. "It's honest." "It's a disaster," Evan said. "Exactly," Margaret replied. "So is this family. It fits beautifully." Someone in the room, probably without meaning to, muttered, "The name already fits." Clara looked around. "See? Support." "That was not support," Evan said weakly. He turned back to the group. "We are still considering options." Clara crossed her arms. "No, we're not." "Clara." "No." Margaret sipped her tea. "She's very decisive. I admire that." Evan looked betrayed. "Mother." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Margaret said. "You named your horse Storm because it stepped on your foot once. That was different." "How?" "It was a horse." "And this," Margaret said serenely, "is your child." The courtiers looked like they wanted to leave, or pray, or both. Clara smiled at Evan. "Chaos, Hale? It sounds strong." "It sounds like a threat," he said. She considered. "Also accurate." He opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. "When we can compromise." "No." "Even a little?" "No." "Add a second name?" "No." He slumped back in his chair like a man losing a very small but very important war. Margaret patted his hand. "You'll get used to it." "I don't want to," he said. "You will," she replied, cheerfully. The room slowly returned to breathing, though several people looked like they might need a moment. Breakfast continued in the awkward way only noble breakfasts could. And somewhere in the palace was a woman named Lydia Moore, read the whispers, heard the laughter, saw the way the court had moved on without her, and decided she was not done. Not yet. Not even close. Lydia Moore chose the gallery corridor because it had three things she loved: foot traffic, echoes, an audience that pretended not to listen. She waited like a woman preparing a dramatic monologue and practiced her expression in a window until it said, concerned, but brave, instead of about to commit social arson. Evan Hale appeared right on schedule, flanked by 2 attendants, and the faint, haunted look of a man who had argued with curtains that morning and lost. "Your Majesty," Lydia said softly, stepping into his path. Evan stopped. The attendants did not. They kept walking. This was not an accident. "Lydia," Evan said, with the polite tone one used for sharp objects. "Move." She didn't. "I only wanted a moment," she said. "For your own good." He sighed. "Or this is never how good moments begin." She leaned in, lowering her voice like this was a secret and not a very loud, bad idea. "You were drugged that night. You know it. You don't have to keep pretending this marriage was your choice." Several nearby courtiers slowed down. One outright stopped to examine a painting very intensely. Evan looked at her. Not angry, not confused, not even tired. Just finished. "Yes," he said clearly. "I was drugged." Lydia's eyes lit up. "Or then you see—" "And," he continued, raising his voice just enough for the corridor to become very interested, "I chose what I did after I learned the truth." The painting received more attention. Lydia frowned. "You're saying—" "I'm saying," Evan cut in, "that Clara is my wife. The child is mine. And this ends now." A courtier coughed, very loudly, for no reason. Definitely not to signal others to listen. Lydia tried to smile. It came out crooked. "Or you're letting pride trap you." Evan took a step closer. His voice stayed calm. His eyes did not. "No," he said. "I'm choosing my family." The word family landed like a dropped crown. Lydia's face went pale. "You can't mean—" "I do," he said. "And you will stop speaking about my wife. You will stop speaking about my child. And you will stop pretending this is concern." He turned slightly, enough that the people pretending not to listen were now definitely listening. "If you don't," he added, "we will have this conversation again, in a room with fewer windows and more witnesses." The corridor went very quiet. Lydia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Margaret Hale appeared at the far end, like a woman who had sensed drama and brought snacks. "Oh," she said pleasantly, taking in the scene. "Are we finished?" Evan nodded. "We are." Margaret looked at Lydia, smiled. "Good. Do find something else to do with your time." Lydia stood there for a second longer, then turned and left, with her footsteps very controlled and her dignity in several small pieces behind her. The painting exhaled. That evening, Evan sat alone in his room, the palace quiet in the way it only ever was after everyone else had decided to mind their business. He should have felt relieved. He did, a little. But there was something else sitting in his chest, heavier and much more annoying. He pictured Clara, half asleep, wrapped in blankets, arguing with soup. And he pictured the way she frowned at food, like it had personally disappointed her. He pictured the way she said, "chaos," like it was a promise, not a threat. And for the first time it hit him. Not like a disaster, not like a joke, but like a very calm, very unwelcome truth. He wasn't afraid of losing arguments. He wasn't afraid of losing sleep. He was afraid of losing her. And that was new. The palace was unusually quiet. Not the dramatic kind of quiet. The suspicious kind. Or the kind that meant everyone was either asleep, hiding, or waiting for something to explode. Clara lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling like it owed her money. Evan sat in a chair nearby, pretending to read a report he had turned upside down. Neither of them spoke. This was new. Usually there was soup to reject, or food to fetch, or a healer to glare at, or a bucket to apologize to. Now there was just quiet. Clara broke first. You don't have to stay, she said. Evan looked up. I know. You're only here because, well. She gestured vaguely at her stomach, which had been behaving for almost an hour and therefore could not be trusted. I'm here because I want to be, he said automatically. They both froze. He cleared his throat. I mean, it's practical. She smiled weakly. Everything about this is very practical. Silence again. Clara picked at the blanket. I know I changed your life. Yes, Evan said honestly. She winced. And I didn't mean to. I know. She hesitated. I didn't plan any of this. The marriage, the everything. Sometimes I think you wake up every day and regret it. He set the report aside. I don't, he said. She looked at him. He almost said more. He almost said, I don't feel trapped. He almost said, I choose this. He almost said, I choose you. Instead, the universe made a noise. Clara sat up too fast. Oh no. Evan was on his feet instantly. Basin? She nodded. He grabbed it. She leaned over it. Reality reminded everyone who was in charge. This, Clara said weakly between waves, is why I don't trust quiet. Evan held her hair back like this was now a permanent skill on his resume. I was about to say something, he said. Was it important? She asked. Yes. Good, she said, then promptly proved her stomach still had opinions. When it was over, she slumped back against the pillows. Sorry, she said. For what? For interrupting. He smiled, small and real. It's becoming a theme. They sat there for a moment, closer than before, not touching but not touching either. You didn't ruin my life, Evan said quietly. She looked at him. He did not look away. I was going to tell you that, he added, then ruined it by saying, just not like this. She laughed, a little, tired. Timing has never been our strength. No, he agreed. It is not. She yawned. You can go if you want. He didn't move. I'm staying. Why? He thought about it. It's habit. She smiled. That's the least romantic answer you could give. I'm very consistent, he said. She closed her eyes. The room settled again. For about 3 minutes, then Clara's face changed. Not nausea this time. Something sharper. Something different. Evan, she said slowly. Yes? I think something is wrong. He sat up straight. Wrong how? She looked at him. The kind of wrong that involves screaming. The palace clock chose that moment to strike. And somewhere, very far away, the fate started running. The palace discovered panic all at once. It began with a shout, then a bell, then 3 servants running in different directions with the same tray. Evan Hale went from sitting to standing in the wrong place in approximately half a second. Something is wrong, he announced. Clara, gripping the bedpost like it had personally offended her, looked at him. Yes, I noticed. What do we do? He asked. We panic, she said. But quietly, if possible. He did not panic quietly. He panicked like a man who had once faced armies and was now losing a staring contest with a hallway. Get the healer, he said. I am the healer, said a woman who had already been standing behind him for a full minute. Oh, Evan said, then immediately turned around and said, Get another healer. The second healer arrived, then a third. Then someone brought towels. Then someone else brought the wrong towels. Then someone brought soup and was physically removed from the room by a maid who hissed, Not today. Margaret Hale arrived like a general who had been waiting for this exact moment her entire life. Everyone out of the way, she said pleasantly, which is how you knew she meant now. People moved. They did not ask questions. Evan, Margaret said, assessing the room in one sharp glance. "You will stand there, hold her hand, and try not to faint." "I am not going to faint," Evan said. "Wonderful," Margaret replied. "Then you can also not scream." Clara looked at him. "If you scream before I do, I will name the baby Soup." He closed his mouth. Somewhere in the palace, the staff betting pool exploded into activity. "I said labor would start early. I said the king would look like that. Is he crying?" "That's not crying, that's breathing wrong," a servant burst in. "Your Majesty, the council." Margaret turned. "Or 'tis irrelevant." The servant nodded and left like he had just been promoted to not being here. Inside the room, time became a suggestion. Evan held Clara's hand like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "You're doing great," he said. She glared at him. "You don't know that." "You're doing very determinedly?" "That's worse." He tried again. "You're very brave." She squeezed his hand. He made a noise like a chair being stepped on. "Don't let go," she said. "I would not dare," he said. Margaret issued orders like she was organizing a small war. "Water. Cloths. Less talking. Who brought soup? Remove them from the building." Evan tried to be useful. He handed the wrong thing twice. He stood in the wrong place 3 times. At one point he tried to sit, and was told, very firmly, not to. "I am helping," he said. "Yes," Margaret said, "by staying upright." Clara laughed once, then stopped. That was a mistake. Time passed. The palace held its breath. Somewhere, the betting pool collapsed because nobody could keep track of anything anymore. Then, a cry. Not Clara's, smaller, louder, very opinionated. The room froze. The healer smiled. Margaret exhaled like a woman who had just won a campaign. Evan forgot how to move. The baby was placed in Clara's arms. Healthy, loud, perfect. It immediately expressed strong feelings about being in the world. Clara looked down, exhausted and smiling. Evan looked down and felt something rearrange his entire existence. "It's loud," he said. Margaret nodded proudly. "Strong lungs, excellent sign." The baby yawned, then complained again. Clara laughed weakly. "Already has opinions?" Evan swallowed. "Clearly inherited." The room relaxed. People started breathing again. Someone outside shouted, "I won 10 silver!" Margaret turned. "Go away." They did. The healer cleaned her hands, smiled at them both, and said, "So, what is the name?" Evan and Clara looked at each other. The room leaned in. The room waited. Not politely, not patiently. It waited like a crowd at a parade, leaning forward and ready to judge. The healer cleared her throat. "So," she said, pen hovering. "The name?" Clara looked down at the baby in her arms. The baby yawned, then immediately complained about the concept of air. Clara smiled. "Chaos." The word landed like a dropped tray. Evan closed his eyes. Not in anger. Not in despair. More like a man accepting that gravity exists and will continue to do so. He opened them again. It looked at Clara. Looked at the baby. Looked at the tiny, furious face that had already begun a lifelong argument with the universe. "All right," he said. The room blinked. Margaret beamed like she had just won a very long, very satisfying game. "Excellent," she said. "Write it in ink, big ink." The healer wrote. The baby kicked. Somewhere outside, the staff betting pool exploded into cheering, arguing, and at least one person demanding their money back because they had not bet on the king agreeing this fast. Evan leaned in carefully and took both of them into his arms, like he was holding something fragile and dangerous and absolutely worth it. He felt full, not tired full, Not overwhelmed full. Just full. Like the space he hadn't noticed was empty had finally been filled, and then some. He looked at Clara. She looked back at him, exhausted, proud, and very much alive. "So you didn't lose anything," she said softly. He huffed a quiet laugh. "I lost every argument." "Yes," she agreed, consistently. "But not this," he said, glancing down at Chaos, who responded with a noise that sounded like a tiny, furious speech. "Not this." Margaret dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief that had absolutely never seen a real problem before today. "You're both doing wonderfully. Now someone will bring refreshments." The door opened. A servant entered. With a bowl. Evan saw it in slow motion. Steam. Pale color. A very familiar lack of joy. Soup. Clara's glare could have melted armor. "No," she said, with the authority of a queen and the exhaustion of a warrior. The servant froze. Evan moved like a hero in a very small, very important battle. He stepped in front of the bowl. Physically. Protectively. Dramatically. "We do not bring that into this room," he said. The servant looked at Margaret. Margaret nodded. "He's right. Or take it away before it offends someone." The soup was removed like a defeated enemy. Clara relaxed. Chaos made a small, victorious noise. Evan sat back down, still holding both of them, and finally understood the thing that had been sneaking up on him for months. He hadn't lost his freedom. He hadn't lost his crown. He hadn't even lost the war. He had just been claimed. And somehow he was perfectly fine with that. The Alpha King didn't lose his crown. He just surrendered it to Clara Reed and Chaos Hale,